It started with a simple noise complaint. A neighbor called about loud crying coming from the old Victorian house on Elmwood Avenue. I figured it was just a domestic argument or maybe a kid having a meltdown, nothing out of the ordinary for a cop like me. But as I drove closer, the air turned colder, sharper, like the world itself was holding its breath. The ivy strangling the house seemed to tighten as I pulled up, almost like it knew I was there. Elmwood Avenue isn't your typical street. It's tucked away on the edge of town, quiet and overgrown. The trees lean over the cracked sidewalks, their branches heavy and low, and the streetlights flicker like they're fighting to stay alive. At the end of the road sat the house, a looming, shadowy relic with chipped paint and windows so dark they looked like hollow eyes. People in town whispered about it. They said a family disappeared there decades ago, leaving nothing behind but rumors. I'd always brushed off those ghost stories, until that night. My shift had already stretched to 12 exhausting hours, and I just wanted to crash at home. But duty doesn't care about fatigue. I stepped out of my cruiser, the door slamming shut with a dull thud, and crunched across the gravel toward the porch. That's when I heard it clearly. A soft, mournful wail floating through the air. It wasn't a child's cry like I'd assumed. It was deeper, sadder, like someone had bottled up years of pain and let it spill out. I climbed the creaky steps and pounded on the door. "Police! Is everything okay in there?" I shouted. Silence, except for my echo and that relentless sobbing. I knocked again, louder. Still nothing. My hand hesitated over the doorknob, but I turned it, and it wasn't locked. The door groaned open, and I stepped inside. My flashlight sliced through the darkness, illuminating furniture shrouded in dusty sheets. The air was heavy with the stench of mildew and decay, thick enough to choke on. The floorboards creaked under my boots, protesting every step. Old portraits lined the walls, faded faces staring at me, their eyes following as I moved deeper into the house. The crying grew louder, tugging me down a narrow hallway. My pulse quickened. The air felt wet and cold, clinging to my skin. I passed a cracked mirror and caught my reflection. Pale, tense. For a split second I swore I saw a shadow dart behind me, but when I spun around, the hallway was empty. At the end of the hall, a bedroom door hung slightly open. I nudged it with my foot, and it swung wide with a low moan. The room was cramped and cluttered, a dresser with flaking paint, a rocking chair frozen in place, and in the corner, a figure. A woman stood there, her back to me, sobbing into her hands. She wore a ragged gray dress, and her hair fell in messy tangles. "Ma'am, are you all right?" I asked, stepping closer. My voice shook, and I hated that it did. She turned, slowly, too slowly, and I stumbled back in horror. Her face wasn't human. Where eyes should have been were empty sockets, black and bottomless. Her mouth gaped in a silent scream, her skin pale and glistening, dripping like candle wax. The sobbing stopped, replaced by a low, guttural moan that vibrated through the walls. "What the hell?" I choked out, clawing at my radio. My hands trembled too hard to grip it. Before I could call for help, she lunged. Her twisted claw-like hands stretched toward me, and that moan exploded into a deafening howl. The house shook. Dust poured from the ceiling, the air crackling with something dark and alive. I ducked and bolted, my boots slipping on the warped floor. The howl chased me, growing louder, hungrier. The portraits on the walls had changed, their faces now twisted in terror, mouths open in silent screams. The hallway stretched endlessly, the front door taunting me from a distance, but I kept running. Finally, I burst outside and slammed the door shut behind me. The crying stopped. The night was still, just my gasping breaths and the thudding of my heart. I stood there, gulping air, trying to piece together what I'd just seen. Backup arrived after I radioed them, but the house was dead quiet by then. We searched every corner, nothing. The bedroom was empty, the air stale and lifeless. My partner shot me skeptical looks, probably thinking I'd cracked under stress. But I know what I saw. I never went back to that house. In my report, I mumbled something about a prank or exhaustion, but I couldn't shake the truth. The house on Elmwood Avenue wasn't just old, it was hiding something dark, something that didn't want to be found. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind picks up, I swear I hear that sobbing again, faint and distant, calling me back to where the nightmares wait. I never believed in ghost stories, not until the night I was sent to the old Ravenswood sanatorium. The call came in just after midnight, a trespasser spotted on the grounds of a crumbling relic, abandoned for decades. Ravenswood wasn't just any sanatorium, it was a place steeped in whispers, its ivy-choked walls and shattered windows hiding a past too grim to speak aloud. Rumors swirled of experiments, inhuman, unspeakable things done to patients who never left. I brushed off the tales as superstition, but as I pulled up to the rusted gates, something felt off. The air was too still, the night too heavy. The sanatorium squatted against the horizon, its silhouette jagged under the pale moonlight. Overgrown weeds strangled the cracked paths, and the wind sighed through the broken panes, carrying the faint drip of water from deep inside. I stepped out of my cruiser, the gravel crunching under my boots, sharp and loud in the silence. My flashlight trembled slightly as I pushed through the gate and approached the entrance, a black maw that seemed to swallow the light. Inside, the air hit me like a damp fist, thick with mold and the sour tang of decay. My footsteps echoed off peeling walls, bouncing back in distorted waves. The floor was a graveyard of debris, splintered chairs, rusted medical carts, and patient files strewn like fallen leaves. I called out, my voice firm but edged with unease. "Police! If anyone's here, come out now." The silence pressed back, unbroken except for that steady, maddening drip. Then I heard it. A faint scuffle, like footsteps darting away. My pulse spiked. "Hey, stop!" I shouted, swinging my flashlight. That's when I saw it. A shadow flitted across the hallway, humanoid but wrong, its edges stretched and blurred. It vanished around a corner. I gave chase, my heart pounding against my ribs, the beam of my light slashing through the dark. The corridors twisted like a labyrinth, each turn spitting me into another identical hall, the walls tightening around me. The shadow led me to a room, its door hanging crooked on rusted hinges. I stepped inside, breath hitching. In the center sat a dusty crate, its wood splintered, a faded label peeling from the side. I approached, wary, and peered in. My stomach lurched. Old scalpels, crusted with something dark, lay beside cracked syringes and vials of murky liquid. And there, nestled among them, was a journal, its leather cover cracked, pages yellowed with age. I opened it, and my blood ran cold. The handwriting was jagged, frantic, detailing experiments that turned my gut. Patients strapped down, injected with unknown substances, their screams scrawled into the margins. Sketches spilled across the pages, bodies contorted, eyes bulging in terror, limbs twisted beyond nature. This wasn't medicine, it was madness. A sound snapped me back, a deliberate step behind me. I spun, and there it was. The shadow, closer now, its two long limbs and faceless form looming in the doorway. It didn't walk. It glided, silent and wrong. Before I could move, the door slammed shut with a bone-rattling bang. The air turned frigid, my breath clouding in front of me, and whispers filled the room, soft, pleading, from voices long dead. "Help us. Don't leave us," they begged, swirling around me like smoke. I snatched the journal and lunged for the door, yanking at the handle. It wouldn't budge. The whispers grew into wails, clawing at my skull, and the shadow drifted closer, its form stretching toward me. With a final, desperate heave, the door gave. I stumbled into the hall, the whispers chasing me, echoing off the walls. I ran, the corridors a blur, the exit a distant hope. The voices screamed now, pleading, warning, but I kept going until I burst through the entrance, the door crashing shut behind me. I never returned to Ravenswood. The journal sits locked in my desk, its words burned into my mind. But the whispers didn't stay behind. On still nights, When the wind carries that faint drip, I hear them, calling me back to the sanatorium's dark heart. The fog was a living thing that night, thick and restless, wrapping Route 13 in a suffocating embrace. The road carved a narrow path through Blackwood Forest, a dense tangle of towering pines that loomed like silent sentinels in the gloom. Their branches twisted upward, skeletal and bare, clawing at the sky. My cruiser's headlights struggled against the mist, casting frail beams that flickered across the cracked asphalt, swallowed almost as soon as they appeared. It was 2:17 a.m., the dashboard clock glowing faintly, and I was alone, or so I thought. I'd driven this stretch of Route 13 countless times on patrol. It was a desolate ribbon of road, rarely traveled after dark, the kind of place where the silence presses against your ears until you swear you hear whispers. But tonight, something broke that stillness. Up ahead, a figure stood by the roadside, thumb outstretched. A girl. I slowed, squinting through the haze. She looked wrong, too pale, her skin glowing faintly like moonlight trapped under ice. She wore an old-fashioned gown, maybe Victorian, with delicate lace trim yellowed by time. It hung loosely on her thin frame, far too light for the biting October chill, yet she stood motionless, unbothered by the cold. I pulled over, tires crunching on the gravel shoulder. "Need a lift?" I called, rolling down the window. She didn't answer, didn't even glance my way. Instead, she drifted to the back door, opened it with a slow, deliberate motion, and slid inside. The air shifted as she settled in. A faint, sweet scent crept into the car, like wilting lilies left too long in a vase. I caught her reflection in the rearview mirror, hollow cheeks, dark eyes sunken deep, staring straight ahead as if I wasn't there. "Where you headed?" I asked, forcing a casual tone despite the unease prickling my neck. Silence. Her hands rested in her lap, folded neatly, unnaturally still. "All right," I muttered, more to myself than her. "I'll drop you at the next town." I eased back onto the road, the fog thickening with every passing mile. It swirled around the cruiser, pressing against the windows like it wanted in. I tried small talk, her name if she was okay, but the words fell flat, swallowed by the heavy quiet. She didn't blink, didn't shift, just stared ahead into the mist. The sweet smell grew stronger, tinged with something darker now, like damp earth or decay. My grip tightened on the wheel. We were nearing the old stone bridge, a relic from another century, its moss-slicked arches spanning a ravine locals called Cursed. People avoided it, and for good reason. Stories clung to that bridge like the fog itself, strange lights flickering beneath it, voices crying out on windy nights, cars plunging into the abyss with no explanation. Drivers claimed they'd seen figures in the road, phantoms that vanished when you got too close. I wasn't one for ghost stories, but the place always set my nerves on edge. The car radio hissed to life as we approached, spitting static that twisted into a low, garbled murmur. I smacked it, frowning, but the sound only sharpened, like a voice trapped in the noise. My eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, and my heart stopped. The back seat was empty. No girl, no gown, nothing. The door hadn't opened, the car hadn't jolted. She was just gone. "What the hell?" I choked out, slamming the brakes. The cruiser screeched to a halt in the middle of the bridge, tires skidding on the wet stone. I twisted around, half expecting her to be crouched on the floor, but the seat stared back at me, bare and cold. A faint impression lingered in the cushion like someone had sat there moments ago, but it was fading fast. My breath fogged the air, sharper than it should have been in the cramped space. I grabbed the radio, hands trembling. "Officer Carter, you copy? I've got something weird on Route 13, near the bridge." Carter's steady voice crackled back. "On my way. Stay put." He arrived 20 minutes later, his flashlight cutting through the mist as we searched. The fog muffled our shouts, turning them into eerie echoes that bounced off the trees. We found no footprints, no sign she'd ever been there, until Carter called me over. Near the ravine, Half buried in the mud was a single shoe. It matched her gown, delicate and lace-trimmed, but it was rotted, crumbling like it had been abandoned for decades. My stomach twisted. We left the bridge that night with more questions than answers. A week later, Carter was gone. He'd been fixated on the girl, convinced there was a case to crack. Against my warnings, he went back to the bridge alone after dark. We found his cruiser the next morning, parked crookedly on the shoulder. The engine hummed, the driver's door hung open, and his flashlight lay in the dirt, its beam stabbing into the fog. No blood, no struggle, just Carter vanished. We searched the forest for days, but the mist gave nothing back. Now, when I patrol Route 13 and the fog rolls in, thick and hungry, I see her. A pale figure in an old gown, thumb out, waiting by the roadside. My headlights catch her for a moment. Those hollow eyes, that unblinking stare, before she fades into the haze. I don't stop anymore. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Some roads belong to the shadows. The call from the mansion. I've been a 911 dispatcher for 8 years, long enough to think I've heard it all. Screams piercing the night, desperate pleas that tug at your soul, chaos drowning out thought. I've handled it all. But some calls don't just test your training, they challenge your sanity, sinking into your mind and refusing to let go. This call was one of those, the kind that haunts you long after the line goes dead. It was just past midnight on a slow Tuesday, one of those nights when the call center feels like a tomb. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their hum louder than usual in the stillness, while I sipped coffee that had gone cold hours ago. The shift dragged on, the clock ticking too slowly toward the end, when the phone rang. The sound sliced through the silence like a knife, sharp, insistent. I picked up on the second ring, my voice steady despite the jolt. 911, what's your emergency? At first, nothing, just the faint rustle of an open line. Then a woman's voice burst through, shrill and cracked with panic. "They're in the house!" she screamed, her words tumbling over each other in a frantic rush. "Please, help! They're here, they're coming for me!" My heart kicked up, but I kept calm, leaning on years of experience. "Ma'am, stay with me. What's your address?" "I don't know where I am," she wailed, her voice breaking like brittle glass. "It's an old mansion, big with columns and broken windows. They're coming up the stairs. God, they're almost here." Her words cut off with a choked gasp, and then the line fell silent, not disconnected, but swallowed by an eerie, oppressive quiet, as if something had smothered the sound itself. I glanced at the screen. No caller ID, no GPS signal. "Ma'am, are you still there?" I asked, fingers flying over the keyboard to log the call. No response. Just that heavy silence, the call timer ticking relentlessly. 10 seconds, 20, 30. It felt like an eternity trapped in that void. There was only one mansion in town that matched her description, a crumbling Victorian heap on the edge of the county, dubbed the Empty House by locals. It loomed there like a forgotten giant, its once grand columns sagging under decades of rot, its windows boarded up like sealed eyes. The yard was overgrown with weeds and thorny vines, and rumors claimed a fire had gutted it back in the 1950s, leaving it abandoned ever since. No one went near it, not vagrants, not even thrill-seeking teens. It was a place that felt wrong, as if the ground itself held its breath. I dispatched officers Thompson and Ramirez. They were solid cops. Thompson, a gruff veteran with a dry sense of humor, and Ramirez, sharp-witted and fearless. "Dispatch, we're on scene," Thompson's voice crackled over the radio 15 minutes later. "Dead quiet out here. No lights, no movement, like a ghost town in one building." "She said they're inside, coming up the stairs," I replied, her scream still echoing in my head. "Be careful." "Copy that," Ramirez chimed in, her tone tight but steady. "We're going in." Through their open mics, I heard their boots crunching on broken glass, the groan of a door wrenched from rusty hinges. The mansion's interior unfolded in their reports, a mausoleum of dust and decay, flashlight beams cutting through the dark. "It's empty," Thompson said, his voice low and puzzled. "No furniture, no sign of anyone. Just peeling wallpaper and floorboards ready to give." Then Ramirez's voice broke through, sharp with alarm. "Wait, there's a phone on the floor." A pause hung heavy. "It's warm, like it was just dropped." A chill ran down my spine. "Get out of there," I said, my calm cracking. "Something's wrong." But the radio went silent. "Thompson, Ramirez, do you copy?" I shouted, my voice rising with each unanswered call. Nothing. Just a faint hiss of static taunted me. I called again, desperation creeping in, but the line stayed mute. I sent a second unit right away. When they arrived, they found Thompson and Ramirez's cruiser in the driveway, parked crooked, engine still running, headlights slicing through thickening fog. Both front doors were flung open, as if they'd bolted out in a hurry. Their radios lay on the ground, batteries inexplicably dead. No blood, no signs of a struggle, no prints in the damp earth. Just absence, like they'd vanished into thin air. We searched for days. Divers scoured the nearby creek. K9 units swept the woods. A helicopter thrummed overhead. Nothing. Not a scrap of clothing, not a hint of where they'd gone. Their families showed up at the station, eyes red and voices raw, begging for answers we didn't have. The department labeled it a tragic incident, closed the case too quickly, and moved on. But I couldn't. That woman's voice, the warm phone, the silence. It wasn't random. It was a trap, and I'd sent them right into its jaws. Now, when the call center goes quiet and the clock ticks past midnight, I hear it. A faint whisper cuts through the static, so soft I could almost convince myself it's nothing. They're still here. It's her voice, the woman from the mansion, trapped in the line like a ghost in the wires. I tell myself it's exhaustion, that my mind's playing tricks after too many long shifts. But deep down, I know the truth. That call never ended. Not for her, not for them, not for me. Somewhere out there in the shadows of that rotting mansion, they're still waiting. I've been pulling night shifts at the station for longer than I care to count, and there's always been something unsettling about the basement. The lights down there hum and stutter, casting weak, jittery pools of yellow across the cracked concrete. Water leaks from unseen pipes, dripping in a relentless rhythm that echoes through the stillness, a sound that burrows into your skull after hours alone. The air smells of damp earth and decay, thick enough to coat your throat. It's the kind of place you avoid unless duty drags you down those creaking stairs. One night, hunched over a stack of paperwork at the front desk, I caught a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye, a shape moving through the gloom. It was tall and gaunt, its arms stretched unnaturally long, swaying as it glided past the holding cells. My breath hitched. I shouted into the dark, my voice bouncing off the walls, but the figure melted away, leaving nothing behind but the drip, drip, drip of water. I checked the security feeds, heart pounding, only to find static buzzing across the screens. No trace of it, no proof, just noise. That wasn't the end of it. Over the next few weeks, it kept showing up, a phantom slipping through the shadows. Sometimes I'd spot it lingering at the edge of my vision, motionless, watching me. Other times I'd hear faint scratches or a shuffle of steps when no one else was around. Officer Carter, my partner on the graveyard shift, noticed it too. We'd joke about it at first, haunted precincts, ghost stories, but the laughter dried up fast. We started hunting for it, flashlights slicing through the dark, radios crackling as we called out positions. It was like chasing smoke. It always slipped away, leaving us grasping at nothing. Then came the night that changed everything. I was alone at the desk, the station quiet except for the usual hum of machinery, when a soft tapping drifted up from the cells below. It wasn't random. It had purpose, like someone drumming their fingers, impatient. A chill crawled up my spine. I grabbed my flashlight and descended, each step groaning under my weight. At the bottom, there it was, the shadow, standing rigid in the dimness. Its warped shape was sharper now, spindly limbs dangling almost to the floor, a head tilted at an angle that made my stomach twist. I couldn't see its face, just a void where one should have been. "Carter!" I barked into my radio, my voice tight with panic. Static hissed back. I bolted down the last few steps, sweeping the beam across the basement until it landed on him. Carter, pressed against the far wall. His face was ashen, eyes wide and unblinking, fixed on the thing. "Don't look at it," he rasped, barely audible. It's not what you think it is." His hands trembled as he clutched his flashlight, the light shaking across the floor. Before I could answer, the bulbs overhead sputtered, plunging us into flickering chaos. The air thickened, pressing against my chest, and the heavy steel door at the top of the stairs slammed shut with a clang that rattled my bones. From the darkness came a sound, a low, guttural growl that seemed to claw its way out of the walls. "Leave now," it rumbled, the words vibrating through the floor. Terror seized me, raw and primal. I grabbed Carter's arm, dragging him toward the stairs. The door resisted, stuck fast as if something held it, but with a desperate shove it gave way. We stumbled out, gasping, into the cool night air. We'd escaped, but it wasn't over. Even outside, under the faint glow of streetlights, I felt it, an invisible pressure, a presence trailing us like a shadow you can't shake. Carter wouldn't talk about it after that. He just stared ahead, hollowed out. I kept working the shifts. Bills don't pay themselves. But every night, it's there. I hear the taps, the whispers in the static, the creak of something moving below. When I close my eyes, I see it. Those endless arms, that faceless gaze, waiting. I don't know what it wants, but I know it's not done with me yet. Days turned to weeks, and the precinct started feeling less like a job and more like a cage. I'd catch myself jumping at shadows, double-checking locks, avoiding the basement stairs. The other officers noticed. Whispers spread about the night shift curse, but no one asked outright. Carter transferred out a month later, leaving me to face it alone. I've thought about quitting, but something keeps me here. Maybe it's stubbornness. Maybe it's fear of what follows if I run. Last night, I found scratches on the desk, deep, jagged lines that weren't there before. The cameras glitched again, and the dripping stopped, just for a moment, before roaring back louder than ever. It's closer now. I feel it in the way the air shifts, the way the lights dim when I walk past. Whatever it is, it's patient, and I'm running out of time.